The coffee was still hot when it splashed across the man's expensive suit. The entire restaurant went silent, watching as the clumsy waitress stammered apologies while trying to clean up her accident. "You stupid girl!" the man shouted, his face red with rage. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" Everyone in Marcel's fine dining was staring at Sarah Chen, the quiet waitress who always seemed to trip over her own feet, the same woman they barely tipped, who they treated like she was invisible. What they didn't know was that Sarah Chen had just identified the napkin in the man's pocket, a napkin containing ricin powder, enough to kill everyone in the restaurant, including the President of the United States, who was having lunch 3 tables away. The accident had saved 27 lives, but the man with the poison was about to realize that his cover was blown. And Sarah Chen was about to show a room full of people that the quiet, clumsy waitress was actually the most dangerous person in the building. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories of hidden heroes and split-second decisions that change everything, please subscribe for more extraordinary tales. For 3 years, Sarah Chen had perfected the art of being forgettable. Every morning at 6 a.m., she tied on her apron at Marcel's Fine Dining, the kind of upscale Washington, D.C. restaurant where politicians made deals over $200 steaks and lobbyists picked up the tab. She moved through the dining room like a ghost, efficient but invisible, professional but unremarkable. Customers looked right through her when she refilled their water glasses. They continued their sensitive conversations as if she didn't exist, assuming that someone in a server's uniform couldn't possibly understand the implications of their words. They were wrong on both counts. Sarah's appearance was carefully calculated. Shoulder-length black hair pulled into a simple ponytail, minimal makeup, sensible shoes that had seen better days. Everything about her screamed working-class immigrant trying to make ends meet. Which, technically, was true, except for the part where she held advanced degrees in chemistry and linguistics, spoke 6 languages fluently, and could kill a person in 17 different ways without leaving evidence. "Sarah!" called Tony Marcelli, the restaurant manager, his voice carrying the particular tone of annoyance he reserved for staff members he considered easily replaceable. "Table 12 is still waiting for their appetizers." "Sorry, Mr. Marcelli," Sarah replied in slightly accented English, maintaining the persona she had crafted with the same precision most people use to build resumes. "I bring right away." Tony rolled his eyes at her grammar and turned away, missing the brief moment when Sarah's expression showed something much sharper than the confusion of an overwhelmed immigrant worker. Sarah had been building this identity for 3 years, ever since the Secret Service had recruited her from a very different kind of life. Before Marcel's, she had been Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the youngest biochemists ever employed by the CDC's Bioterror Response Division. Before that, she had been Agent Chen, working deep cover operations in Southeast Asia for an alphabet soup of agencies that didn't officially exist. But official careers had a way of ending when you discovered that your own government was conducting illegal weapons tests on civilian populations. Sarah had found herself faced with a choice: stay quiet and keep her prestigious position, or expose the truth and become a target. She had chosen truth. And truth, as she quickly discovered, was a luxury that made you unemployable in the world of legitimate intelligence work. That's when Director Harrison Mills had approached her with an unusual offer. Instead of disappearing into witness protection or fleeing the country, would she be interested in protecting the very politicians who had made her previous work necessary? "We need someone inside the ecosystem," Mills had explained during their clandestine meeting in a Virginia parking garage. "Someone who can move through the spaces where real decisions get made, but who's invisible to the people making them. You want me to be a waitress? I want you to be a guardian angel who happens to serve coffee." The assignment was simple in concept, complex in execution. Embed herself in the Washington, D.C. service industry and monitor for threats against high-value targets. Politicians, foreign dignitaries, business leaders and other VIPs who frequented high-end establishments where sensitive conversations happened over expensive meals. Sarah had accepted because the alternative was spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. At least this way, her paranoia would serve a purpose. Marcel's fine dining was perfect for her mission. Located 6 blocks from the Capitol building, it was a favourite spot for senators, congressmen, and the lobbyists who courted them. The restaurant's reputation for discretion and excellent soundproofing made it popular for conversations that required privacy. What the customers didn't realise was that their privacy was being monitored by someone whose scientific training allowed her to detect chemical weapons by smell, whose linguistic abilities let her understand conversations in multiple languages, and whose intelligence background helped her recognise the behavioural patterns of people planning violence. Over 3 years, Sarah had quietly thwarted a dozen potential security incidents. A congressional staffer who had been recruited by foreign intelligence and was planning to slip classified documents to his handler during a business lunch. A lobbyist who had been slowly poisoning a senator with mercury compounds mixed into his regular cocktail. A group of domestic terrorists who had planned to place a bomb in the restaurant's wine cellar during a fundraising dinner. None of these incidents had made the news. None of the intended victims had ever known they were in danger. Sarah's interventions were subtle. A spilled drink that forced someone to change tables, a kitchen accident that delayed a meal until backup security could arrive, a sudden case of food poisoning that sent a potential assassin to the hospital instead of to his target. She was good at being invisible, but today would test just how good she was at becoming visible when it mattered most. The morning had started normally. Sarah arrived early to set up her section, reviewing the day's reservation list with particular attention to high-value guests. Senator Patricia Morrison, the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, had a lunch meeting scheduled at noon. Congressman David Park, who sat on the Intelligence Oversight Committee, was bringing 3 guests at 1 p.m. But the reservation that made Sarah's pulse quicken was the one listed simply as Harrison, Party of 4, 12:30 p.m. President James Harrison was coming to Marcel's. It wasn't unusual for the president to make unscheduled stops at local restaurants. It was part of his man of the people image. But it was unusual for the Secret Service to give such short notice to the restaurant staff. Sarah suspected this was a last-minute decision, possibly related to sensitive meetings that couldn't be held at the White House. As the lunch rush began, Sarah positioned herself strategically to observe the entire dining room. Her section included tables that would give her sightlines to the president's party when they arrived, as well as access to the kitchen and service areas where threats were most likely to originate. At 12:35 p.m., President Harrison arrived with his typical minimal fanfare. 3 Secret Service agents in plain clothes, the president himself in a casual suit that probably cost more than Sarah made in 6 months, and Deputy Chief of Staff Michael Torres, who was known for his ability to arrange meetings that never appeared on official schedules. They were seated at table 15, Sarah's section. Perfect. As she approached to take their order, Sarah's trained ear picked up fragments of conversation that made her blood run cold. The lab results from the CDC investigation. Cannot let this information become public. Whatever it takes to protect national security. They were discussing the bioweapons testing that Sarah had exposed 3 years earlier. The same testing that had ended her career and forced her into this strange double life. Sarah maintained her professional demeanour as she took their orders, but internally she was calculating risks. If they were discussing damage control for the bioweapons program, it meant someone was still pushing for its continuation. And if that someone was willing to arrange a private meeting with the president at a public restaurant, they were either very confident or very desperate. As she walked back to the kitchen, Sarah noticed something that made her training alarm bells start ringing. A man at table 8 was observing the president's table with the kind of systematic attention that suggested professional surveillance. The man appeared to be in his 50s, well-dressed but not ostentatiously so, dining alone while reading what appeared to be a financial newspaper. But Sarah noticed that his eyes moved in patterns that had nothing to do with reading and everything to do with gathering intelligence. She began conducting her own surveillance of the Watcher, using the natural movements of service to position herself for optimal observation. What she discovered over the next 15 minutes confirmed her suspicions. The man was conducting a detailed assessment of Secret Service positions, timing their rotational patterns and mapping potential approach vectors to the President's table. More troubling, he was wearing latex gloves disguised as leather, a detail that suggested he was planning to handle something that couldn't leave fingerprints. Sarah needed to get closer to assess the threat level, but approaching his table directly would blow her cover if he was indeed a professional. Instead, she employed a technique she had perfected over 3 years of invisible surveillance: the service station accident. She deliberately overfilled a water pitcher at the station next to table 8, allowing water to spill onto the floor. As she knelt to clean it up with exaggerated clumsiness, she positioned herself to observe the man's belongings more closely. What she saw made her mouth go dry with fear. Tucked partially under the man's newspaper was a white cloth napkin that appeared to have been treated with some kind of powder. Given the latex gloves and the man's obvious focus on the President, Sarah's scientific training immediately suggested the worst-case scenario: a chemical or biological weapon designed for close contact deployment. The delivery method was ingenious in its simplicity. In an upscale restaurant, it would be perfectly natural for someone to approach the President's table with what appeared to be a dropped napkin, or to offer assistance with cleaning up a spill. A brief contact with treated fabric could deliver enough toxin to kill within minutes. Sarah finished cleaning up her staged accident and returned to the kitchen, her mind racing through response options. She couldn't call for Secret Service assistance without revealing her own identity and blowing 3 years of deep cover. She couldn't evacuate the restaurant without causing panic and possibly triggering the attack. And she couldn't be certain of the threat level without conducting a closer examination of the suspected weapon. She needed to act on her own initiative, using the skills that had made her valuable to the intelligence community and the cover identity that had made her invisible to it. Sarah checked her watch. 12:47 p.m. The President's party had been at their table for 12 minutes. In a restaurant like Marcel's, the typical high-profile business lunch lasted between 45 minutes and an hour. That gave her a window of roughly 30 minutes to neutralize the threat without causing a scene that would compromise her position or endanger civilians. But first, she needed to confirm her suspicions about the napkin. Sarah's next move required the kind of improvisation that separated good intelligence operatives from dead ones. She needed to get close enough to the suspect to conduct a chemical analysis of the napkin without alerting him to her suspicions. The answer came from an unexpected source: Marcel's complicated wine service protocol. As one of the restaurant's more experienced servers, Sarah was occasionally called upon to assist with wine selections for VIP guests. This gave her legitimate access to move between tables, approach customers she wasn't directly serving, and engage in brief conversations that wouldn't seem suspicious. She approached the sommelier, a pompous man named Philippe, who treated the restaurant's wine cellar like his personal kingdom. "Philippe," she said, maintaining her slightly broken English, "the gentleman at table 8, he asked about wine pairing for his lunch. You want I should ask what he is having?" Philippe's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of a true wine snob, presented with a potential convert. "Bien sûr. Yes, Sarah. Go ask what he's ordered. I will make perfect recommendation." Sarah approached table 8 with a genuine smile and the confident demeanour of someone performing a routine service task. "Excuse me, sir," she said to the suspect. "Our sommelier would like to suggest wine pairing for your lunch. May I ask what you have ordered?" The man looked up from his newspaper, and Sarah got her first clear look at his face. Middle-aged, unremarkable features, but eyes that held the kind of cold calculation she had learned to recognize in dangerous people. "I'm not interested in wine," he replied curtly, starting to turn back to his paper. But Sarah had already seen what she needed to see. The napkin was positioned so that she could observe it from her current angle, and her trained eye immediately identified the telltale signs of chemical treatment. The fabric had a slight discoloration that suggested powder residue, and there was a faint, sweet smell that made her biochemistry training scream warnings. Ricin, she was almost certain. "Of course, sir," Sarah replied, backing away with appropriate deference. "So sorry to bother you." As she returned to the sommelier, Sarah's mind was already calculating dosage levels and delivery methods. Ricin was a perfect assassination weapon for this scenario. Highly lethal in small quantities, easily concealed, and with symptoms that would initially be mistaken for food poisoning or a heart attack. More troubling, the amount of powder she had observed on the napkin was enough to kill not just the president, but anyone else who came into contact with the contaminated fabric. In a confined space like Marcel's dining room, multiple casualties were inevitable. Sarah needed to neutralize the threat immediately, but in a way that wouldn't alert the assassin to her knowledge of his plan. She returned to the kitchen and began preparing what appeared to be a routine coffee service for the dining room. But instead of the usual premium blend, Sarah was creating something much more specific. A chemical solution that would neutralize ricin on contact while appearing to be nothing more than spilled coffee. Using supplies available in any commercial kitchen, Sarah mixed a combination of bleach-based sanitizer and enzyme cleaner that would denature the protein structure of ricin while leaving fabric stains that would mask the evidence of the original powder. The solution had to be precisely calibrated. Too weak, and it wouldn't neutralize the toxin. Too strong, and it would create noticeable chemical reactions that might alert the assassin. Sarah's years of laboratory experience allowed her to create the mixture by smell and visual assessment, skills that had kept her alive in field situations where precise measurement wasn't possible. With her neutralizing agent prepared, Sarah loaded a coffee service cart and began making rounds to tables in the dining room. This gave her a legitimate reason to be moving through the restaurant while carrying liquids, setting up the accident that would save everyone's lives. As she approached table 8, Sarah reviewed her plan one final time. She would need to spill the coffee solution directly onto the treated napkin while making it appear completely accidental. The man would likely be angry about the damage to his clothing and the disruption to his plan, but anger was preferable to mass casualties. The challenging part would be ensuring that the spill covered the entire napkin while appearing natural enough that the man wouldn't suspect deliberate action. Sarah positioned her cart next to table 8 and began the delicate process of serving coffee to nearby tables. She needed the assassin to be distracted for the crucial moment when she would accidentally bump the cart. Her opportunity came when the man's phone rang. As he answered the call, turning slightly away from his table, Sarah executed her plan. A carefully calculated stumble sent the coffee pot flying from her hands, its contents arcing through the air in a trajectory that would have impressed a physics professor. The hot liquid splashed across the man's expensive suit, soaked his newspaper, and most importantly, saturated the treated napkin with enough neutralizing solution to render it harmless. The reaction was immediate and exactly what Sarah had expected. "You stupid girl!" the man shouted, leaping to his feet as coffee dripped from his clothing. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" The entire restaurant went silent, all eyes turning to watch the scene. Sarah could see Secret Service agents at the president's table tensing, assessing whether the disturbance represented a threat to their protectee. "I'm so sorry, Sarah stammered, playing her role perfectly while using towels to clean up the spill. As she worked, she carefully palmed the now neutralized napkin, ensuring that it wouldn't be left behind for potential analysis. The man's anger was genuine and intense, exactly the kind of reaction someone would have if their carefully planned assassination attempt had just been ruined by a clumsy waitress. "This is unacceptable," he continued, his voice carrying across the dining room. "I demand to speak to the manager." Perfect. The louder he got, the more attention he drew from restaurant staff and security personnel. Sarah could see Tony Marcelli hurrying over, his face red with embarrassment at the public scene. But Sarah was watching something else. The man's body language and micro-expressions as he realized that his weapon was gone, soaked and contaminated beyond use. There was a moment, less than 2 seconds, when his anger shifted from genuine frustration to something much more dangerous. He had recognized that his operation was blown, which meant Sarah's real work was just beginning. Tony Marcelli arrived at table 8 in full damage control mode, his Italian-American accent becoming more pronounced as his stress level increased. "Sir, I am so incredibly sorry about this incident," he began, shooting murderous glances at Sarah. "Please, allow us to pay for cleaning your suit, and of course your meal is completely complimentary." "I don't want compensation," the man interrupted, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "I want that incompetent waitress fired immediately." Sarah continued cleaning up the spill, but her attention was focused on the man's behavior rather than Tony's profuse apologies. The assassin was making a critical error. Instead of minimizing the incident and leaving quickly, he was prolonging the confrontation and drawing more attention to himself. This suggested either poor operational discipline or, more troubling, a backup plan that didn't require stealth. Sarah's suspicions were confirmed when she noticed the man's hand moving toward his jacket pocket in a motion that experience had taught her to recognize. He was reaching for a secondary weapon. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The ricin-treated napkin hadn't been the primary assassination method. It had been a diversion, designed to occupy security attention while the real attack took place. Sarah needed to warn the Secret Service agents immediately, but doing so would blow her cover and potentially escalate the situation into a shooting match in a crowded restaurant. Instead, she did something that would have puzzled any observer who didn't understand the complexity of deep cover operations. She became even more clumsy. As Tony continued his apologies and the assassin reached for his concealed weapon, Sarah accidentally bumped into the man, causing him to stagger slightly. The contact was brief but deliberate. Sarah had used the moment to conduct a tactical assessment of what he was carrying. Her hand brushed against his jacket pocket and felt the unmistakable shape of a ceramic knife, designed to bypass metal detectors and inflict fatal wounds without triggering security alarms. Worse, she felt a second object in his other pocket, what appeared to be a small aerosol device, possibly containing chemical or biological agents as a backup to the ricin. The man was carrying enough weapons to kill everyone at the president's table and potentially contaminate the entire restaurant. Sarah straightened up, maintaining her apologetic demeanor while internally calculating threat vectors and response options. She was dealing with a professional who had planned for multiple contingencies and was now moving to a more direct approach. "Again, so sorry," she said to the assassin, her voice carrying just the right amount of immigrant worker anxiety. "You want I get you towels from kitchen?" "Get away from me," the man snarled, his patience clearly exhausted. But Sarah had accomplished her goal. She now knew exactly what weapons he was carrying and could plan accordingly. The assassin turned back to Tony, his anger serving as cover for his real intentions. "I want to speak to the owner about this incident," he said. "This level of incompetence is unacceptable in an establishment of this caliber." Tony nodded eagerly, seeing an opportunity to prevent negative publicity. "Of course, sir. Our owner, Mr. Marcel, is actually here today. I'll bring him over immediately." As Tony hurried away to find Marcel, Sarah realized what was happening. The assassin was creating a plausible reason to move around the restaurant, positioning himself for an attack on the president's table. She had minutes, possibly less, to prevent a massacre. Sarah excused herself to the kitchen, ostensibly to get cleaning supplies for the spill. But once out of sight, she moved with the efficiency of her intelligence training. From her personal locker, she retrieved items that appeared to be typical restaurant worker supplies, but had been carefully modified for defensive purposes. A cleaning spray bottle that contained a concentrated irritant compound, a stack of dishcloths that included a Kevlar mesh layer, a utility knife that was balanced for throwing rather than food preparation. More importantly, she accessed the emergency communication device hidden in her uniform pocket, a device that could transmit directly to Secret Service command frequencies. But as Sarah prepared to break her cover and call for immediate assistance, she realized that the situation had become even more complex. Through the kitchen's observation window, she could see that the assassin wasn't acting alone. A woman at table 12, someone Sarah had dismissed as just another business lunch patron, was now moving in a pattern that suggested coordination with the first assassin. And a man near the restaurant's entrance was positioning himself to block the primary exit route. This wasn't a lone wolf attack. It was a coordinated operation involving at least 3 trained operatives, all now moving toward attack positions. Sarah made a decision that would have violated every protocol in any official playbook. Instead of calling for backup and potentially triggering a firefight in a crowded restaurant, she decided to neutralize all 3 threats herself. She had roughly 90 seconds before the assassins would be in position to begin their attack. 90 seconds to save the president's life and protect 27 innocent civilians from becoming collateral damage. Sarah Chen, the quiet waitress who stumbled through her shifts and spoke broken English, stepped out of the kitchen and became someone else entirely. The transformation wasn't visible to casual observers. She still wore the same uniform, still carried the same supplies, but everything about her posture, her movement patterns, and her focus had changed. She was no longer hiding, she was hunting. Sarah's first target was the woman at table 12, who was reaching into her purse with the practiced casualness of someone accessing a concealed weapon. The woman's timing suggested she was planning to create a distraction that would allow the primary assassin to approach the president's table. Sarah walked directly toward table 12, carrying her tray of cleaning supplies as if responding to a routine service request. To anyone watching, she appeared to be the same clumsy waitress who had just caused a scene with spilled coffee. But as Sarah reached table 12, her movement pattern changed completely. The cleaning spray she carried discharged directly into the woman's face, not the harmless kitchen cleaner it appeared to be, but a concentrated irritant that would cause temporary blindness and respiratory distress without permanent damage. The woman gasped and clawed at her eyes, unable to see or breathe properly. Before she could cry out or reach for her weapon, Sarah had moved behind her chair and applied a sleeper hold with the precision of her military training. The woman slumped forward, unconscious, appearing to any observer to have suddenly fallen ill. Sarah eased her into a position that looked like she had simply put her head down on the table, perhaps feeling faint from the heat. 1 down, 2 to go. The man near the entrance had noticed the disturbance at table 12 and was now moving toward the dining room with purpose that confirmed Sarah's assessment of his role in the operation. But he was approaching through a narrow corridor between tables, a tactical error that gave Sarah the advantage of controlling his approach vector. She intercepted him near table 9, carrying a stack of dishes that provided perfect cover for what happened next. As the man passed her, Sarah appeared to stumble slightly, dropping several plates. The crash drew attention from nearby diners, creating a moment of distraction that masked the sound of her elbow striking a precise nerve cluster at the base of his neck. The man dropped like a stone, his body going limp as his nervous system shut down temporarily. To anyone watching, it looked like he had slipped on the broken dishes and knocked himself unconscious. Sarah quickly positioned him against a nearby chair, making it appear that he had simply fallen and was being attended to by concerned restaurant staff. 2 down, 1 to go. But the primary assassin, the man who had been soaked with coffee, was no longer at table 8. Sarah scanned the dining room quickly, her training allowing her to process multiple threat vectors simultaneously. The president's table was still secure, with Secret Service agents maintaining their positions, but she couldn't locate the primary threat. Then she saw him. The assassin had moved toward the kitchen area, presumably seeking an alternative approach to his target. But he had made a tactical error. He was now in Sarah's territory, the area of the restaurant she knew better than anyone. Sarah followed him into the service corridor that connected the kitchen to the main dining room, the same area where she had first noticed his weapons during their earlier confrontation. In the narrow corridor, away from civilian observers, the pretense of accidental encounters ended. "Stop right there," Sarah said, her voice completely different from the broken English she had used throughout her shift. The assassin turned, surprised to hear perfect, unaccented English from the clumsy waitress. His hand moved toward his concealed knife, but stopped when he saw that Sarah was no longer carrying cleaning supplies. She was holding a professional-grade taser, aimed directly at his center mass. "Who are you?" he demanded, his training finally recognizing that he was dealing with another professional. "Someone who takes workplace safety very seriously," Sarah replied. "The ricin on the napkin, the ceramic knife, the aerosol device, you're done." The man's eyes narrowed as he calculated his options. "You're law enforcement. I'm someone who really doesn't want to explain to my boss why the president got killed on my shift." The standoff lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then the assassin made his move, lunging forward with the ceramic knife in a pattern that suggested extensive close-quarters combat training. But Sarah had been expecting exactly this response. The taser discharged, sending 50,000 volts through the assassin's nervous system. He convulsed and collapsed, the knife clattering harmlessly across the floor. Sarah zip-tied his hands with restraints she carried as part of her emergency kit, then carefully secured his weapons and the aerosol device for later analysis by hazmat specialists. 3 down. Threat neutralized. The entire operation had taken less than 4 minutes from start to finish. To most of the restaurant's patrons, it had been a series of unrelated incidents. A clumsy waitress spilling coffee, a patron feeling ill, someone slipping on broken dishes, and a kitchen staff member dealing with what appeared to be a disruptive customer. Only the Secret Service agents had noticed the pattern, and Sarah could see them beginning to move from passive observation to active assessment mode. It was time to disappear back into her cover identity before anyone started asking questions she couldn't answer. Sarah returned to the dining room and resumed her normal duties, cleaning up the broken dishes and checking on the ill woman at table 12. To any observer, she was simply dealing with the aftermath of a busy lunch shift. But President Harrison's eyes met hers briefly as she passed his table, and in that moment, Sarah saw recognition. Not of her identity. Her cover was too deep for that, but recognition that something significant had just happened and that the quiet waitress had somehow been involved in resolving it. The president nodded slightly, a gesture so subtle that only someone trained in surveillance would have noticed it. Sarah returned the nod with equal discretion, then continued her work as if nothing had happened. Because in her world, that's exactly how the most important victories were won. Quietly, invisibly, by people whose names would never appear in any official reports. An hour later, Marcel's fine dining had returned to its normal rhythm. The president's party had finished their lunch and departed with the usual Secret Service efficiency. The woman at table 12 had been taken to a nearby hospital, reportedly suffering from what appeared to be a severe allergic reaction. The man who had slipped on broken dishes was being treated for a concussion at the same medical facility, and the primary assassin had simply vanished, taken into custody by individuals who arrived at the restaurant's service entrance and left no record of their visit. Sarah continued her shift, serving lunch to politicians and lobbyists who remained completely unaware that they had just witnessed one of the most significant threat neutralizations in Secret Service history. But Director Harrison Mills was very aware of what had happened. At 3:30 p.m., as Sarah was setting up for the dinner shift, she received a text message on her personal phone. Kitchen supply delivery, service entrance. 15 minutes. Sarah recognized the code phrase. Mills wanted a debrief, and he wanted it immediately. She met him in the restaurant's service alley, the same kind of anonymous location where their relationship had begun 3 years earlier. Mills looked exactly as he had during their first meeting. Expensive suit that wasn't quite expensive enough to draw attention, silver hair that suggested authority without ostentation, and eyes that never stopped calculating threat assessments. "Dr. Chen," he said, using her real name for the first time in months. "Or should I say Agent Chen?" "Sarah is fine," she replied. "What do you want to know?" "I want to know how a waitress managed to neutralize a 3-person assassination team without alerting the Secret Service, the local police, or even the restaurant's management to what was happening." Sarah leaned against the alley wall, suddenly feeling the exhaustion that came after high-stakes operations. "I did my job. The president is alive, the civilians are safe, and the threat has been eliminated." Your job was to observe and report, Mills corrected, not to engage in solo operations against trained assassins. My job, Sarah said firmly, is to protect people. When I identified an imminent threat to the president's life, I neutralized it using the resources available to me. Mills studied her for a moment. The ricin analysis came back from our lab, enough to kill everyone in that dining room. The ceramic knife was razor-sharp and positioned for a heart strike. The aerosol device contained a concentrated nerve agent that would have killed the president even if the other methods failed. I know. You prevented a massacre, Sarah, but you also violated every protocol we've established for this operation. Sarah pushed away from the wall, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there during her waitress persona. Those protocols assume backup is available. They assume I can call for help without compromising 3 years of deep cover. They assume the threat will wait for proper procedures to be followed. The protocols exist to protect you. The protocols exist to protect the operation, Sarah interrupted, which is fine, except when the operation conflicts with actually saving lives. Mills was quiet for a moment, processing her words. The president asked about you. Sarah's expression didn't change, but internally she felt a spike of concern. What did you tell him? I told him that Marcel's employs very dedicated staff members who take customer safety seriously. And he accepted that? President Harrison isn't stupid, Sarah. He knows when something significant has happened, but he also knows when not to ask questions that might compromise ongoing operations. Mills pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a series of photographs. The 3 assassins you neutralized are part of a larger network, international operatives with connections to state sponsors who want the president dead. Sarah studied the images, recognizing the woman from Table 12 and the man from the entrance. How large is the network? Large enough that this won't be their only attempt, which brings me to why I'm here. Mills put away the tablet and faced her directly. We're pulling you out. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. What? 3 years is a long time for deep cover. Your effectiveness has been proven, but today's operation exposed you to too much scrutiny. It's time to extract you and move you to a different assignment. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Panic. Not the tactical alerts that came during dangerous operations, but genuine fear of losing something important. I can't leave, she said. This place, these people, they trust me. I know this environment better than anyone else you could place here. Sarah, there are ongoing threats that only I would recognize, she continued, her voice becoming more urgent. Senator Morrison is being tracked by foreign intelligence. Congressman Park is unknowingly dating a Russian asset. The ambassador from Thailand has been compromised by his own security detail. Mills raised an eyebrow. You've identified all of this? I've been documenting it for months, waiting for the right moment to act. If you pull me out now, those threats remain active. We can brief your replacement. My replacement will take months to build the kind of access I have. By then, people will be dead. Mills considered this, recognizing the truth in her assessment. Deep cover operations were like delicate ecosystems. Removing a key element could destabilize everything. What are you proposing? He asked. Let me finish what I started. Give me 6 more months to neutralize the remaining threats. Then we'll discuss extraction. 6 months is a long time in this business. 6 months is nothing compared to 3 years, Sarah countered, and it's a lot less than the time it would take to rebuild this operation from scratch. Mills was quiet for several minutes, weighing risks and benefits with the calculating mind that had made him successful in the intelligence community. Conditional approval, he finally said. 6 months, but with enhanced security protocols. We'll have a backup team monitoring the restaurant's perimeter. Any sign that your cover is compromised, and we extract immediately. Understood. And Sarah? Mills fixed her with a stare that carried decades of operational experience. No more solo heroics. The next time you identify a threat of this magnitude, you call for backup regardless of cover concerns. Sarah nodded, though they both knew that in the moment of crisis, she would make whatever decision seemed most likely to protect innocent lives. Mills handed her a new phone, identical to her previous device but with enhanced communication capabilities. Direct line to tactical support. Use it. As Mills walked away, Sarah returned to the restaurant, tying on her apron for the dinner shift. But she moved differently now. Not the careful invisibility she had cultivated for 3 years, but with the confidence of someone who had proven herself under the ultimate pressure. That evening, as Sarah served dinner to a dining room full of powerful people who remained oblivious to how close they had come to witnessing a presidential assassination, she noticed something different in how they treated her. Congressman Park actually thanked her when she refilled his water glass. Senator Morrison smiled and asked how her day had been. Even Tony Marcelli seemed to view her with something approaching respect rather than his usual condescension. Word had spread, in the way that word always spreads in small communities, that Sarah had handled the lunch crisis with unusual competence. The details were vague, something about helping with a medical emergency and cleaning up a kitchen accident, but the impression was clear. The quiet waitress was more capable than anyone had realized. As the evening wound down and Sarah cleaned her section, she found a note left on table 15, where the president had been sitting. To the guardian who serves more than food, your vigilance is noticed and appreciated. Thank you for your service. A grateful customer. Sarah pocketed the note and continued her work, knowing that the president's gratitude was sincere, but also knowing that such recognition came with its own dangers. In the world of deep cover operations, being noticed was the first step toward being compromised, but it was also the first step toward being trusted with even greater responsibilities. 6 months later, Sarah would face that choice. Whether to continue her invisible guardianship or step into a more visible role in protecting the people who made decisions that shaped the world. For now, she was content to remain what she had always been, the most dangerous waitress in Washington, D.C., protecting her customers one spilled cup of coffee at a time. 2 weeks after the assassination attempt, Sarah had settled back into her routine at Marcel's, but with heightened awareness of the security landscape. The enhanced protocols Mills had mentioned were subtle but effective. She occasionally spotted surveillance teams positioned around the restaurant, and her new communication device buzzed with periodic check-ins from tactical support. More importantly, Sarah was now actively investigating the larger network that had targeted the president. Using her access to private conversations among Washington's political elite, Sarah had begun mapping connections between the failed assassination attempt and ongoing security threats. What she discovered was more extensive and troubling than anyone had suspected. The ricin attack hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic campaign to eliminate key American political figures and destabilize the government through targeted assassinations. Senator Morrison, who often ate lunch at Marcel's while discussing classified Foreign Relations Committee business, had been photographed by individuals who weren't journalists. Congressman Park, who treated the restaurant as his unofficial office for sensitive intelligence oversight meetings, had been approached by a woman claiming to be a think tank researcher, but whose credentials didn't check out under closer examination. Even more disturbing, Sarah had identified at least 3 restaurant employees at other high-end establishments who appeared to be conducting the same kind of systematic surveillance that she was, except they were gathering intelligence for the other side. The enemy had learned from her success and was replicating her methods. On a Thursday evening, as Sarah served dinner to a table of State Department officials discussing trade negotiations with Southeast Asian countries, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "The Bangkok summit is confirmed for next month," one official said, cutting into his steak. "All 5 regional leaders, plus our delegation. It's the perfect opportunity to finalize the economic partnership." "Security concerns?" asked another. "Minimal. We're using the Thai government's protection protocols, supplemented by our own detail, standard diplomatic security." Sarah's training in threat assessment immediately identified the problem. If foreign operatives had been planning systematic attacks on American leadership, a summit bringing together multiple high-value targets in a foreign location would be irresistible. More troubling, her investigation had revealed that the Thai ambassador's security detail, The same detail that would be responsible for protecting American officials at the Bangkok summit had been compromised. Sarah needed to act quickly, but this time she would follow Mills' directive and call for backup before attempting solo operations. That night, after the restaurant closed, Sarah used her secure phone to contact tactical support. "I need an immediate meeting with Director Mills," she said. "I've identified a threat to the Bangkok summit." "Stand by." Within 30 minutes, Mills arrived at the restaurant's service entrance, accompanied by 2 agents Sarah didn't recognize. "What have you found?" he asked without preamble. Sarah led them to the restaurant's private dining room, where she had prepared a detailed briefing using information gathered over 2 weeks of careful surveillance. "The assassination attempt against the president was a proof of concept," she began, spreading documents across the table. "The same organization is planning a larger operation targeting the Bangkok summit." Mills studied the documents, photographs of suspicious individuals, timeline analysis of their activities, and financial records Sarah had obtained through creative interpretation of her access privileges. "How certain are you of this assessment?" he asked. "Certain enough to stake my life on it," Sarah replied. "The Thai ambassador's security chief has been compromised. The summit location has been surveilled by individuals connected to the same network that sent the assassins here. And I've identified at least 3 other infiltration points where foreign operatives have embedded themselves in positions similar to mine." One of the agents Mills had brought leaned forward. "You're saying they've created their own version of your operation?" "I'm saying they learned from our success and adapted our methods for their purposes," Sarah corrected. "The difference is that their goal isn't protection, it's elimination." Mills was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. If Sarah's assessment was accurate, the Bangkok summit would be walking into a carefully prepared kill zone. "What do you recommend?" he asked. "Cancel the summit. That's not politically feasible. Too much has been invested in these negotiations. Then change the location and security protocols at the last minute. Force them to abandon months of preparation and react to our timeline instead of their own." Mills nodded slowly. "That might work, but it would require convincing the State Department and the Secret Service to completely revise their security plan based on intelligence gathered by a waitress." "Based on intelligence gathered by someone with 3 years of deep cover experience and a proven track record of threat identification," Sarah corrected. The second agent spoke up. "Even if we could convince them to change the summit location, how do we neutralize the embedded operatives you've identified? If they're using the same methods you are, extracting them without blowing their cover would be nearly impossible." Sarah smiled grimly. "We don't extract them, we turn them." Mills raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Most deep cover operatives are motivated by ideology, money, or coercion. If we can identify which motivates each individual, we can potentially flip them or at least neutralize their effectiveness." Sarah pulled out additional files she had compiled. "The woman at Antoine's restaurant has been funneling information to handlers who threatened her family in Eastern Europe. The man at the Capitol Hill Club is being paid enough to support a gambling addiction that would otherwise destroy his life. The couple at Bistro Francais are true believers, but they're also deeply in debt." "You've been investigating other operatives on your own?" Mills asked, his voice carrying a warning. "I've been doing my job," Sarah replied. "My job is protecting American interests, which includes identifying threats wherever they exist." Mills exchanged glances with his agents. "This is far beyond the scope of your original assignment." "The scope of my original assignment changed the moment I prevented a presidential assassination," Sarah said firmly. "You can either support my expanded investigation or explain to your superiors why you ignored intelligence that could prevent a massacre." The ultimatum hung in the air between them. Sarah was essentially forcing Mills to choose between supporting her unofficial expansion of authority or accepting responsibility for any consequences that resulted from inaction. Mills made his decision. "You have 2 weeks to develop actionable intelligence on the summit threat. Full support, including backup teams and resources. But if this operation goes wrong, the blowback will be significant." "Understood. And Sarah?" Mills fixed her with his calculating stare. "After this operation, we're having a serious conversation about your future in this program. You've proven yourself capable of far more than serving coffee and observing conversations." As Mills and his agents left, Sarah remained in the private dining room, studying the documents spread across the table. Each photograph, each timeline, each financial record represented a piece of a puzzle that threatened to claim more lives than any terrorist attack in American history. She had 2 weeks to prevent an international incident and save the lives of multiple world leaders. Just another day at the office for the most dangerous waitress in Washington. 6 months later, Sarah Chen stood in the same alley behind Marcel's fine dining, where her conversation with Director Mills had begun. But this time she wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. The Bangkok summit had been a success, not because it had proceeded as planned, but because it had been completely reorganized at the last minute, based on her intelligence. The embedded operatives she had identified were now either working for American intelligence or facing charges in countries that didn't offer comfortable prison accommodations. Most importantly, 5 world leaders were alive, because a waitress had spilled coffee at exactly the right moment and then refused to stop protecting the people who needed her help. "Your replacement starts Monday," Mills said, handing her a new set of credentials. "Dr. Sarah Chen, Special Agent, Diplomatic Security Service. Congratulations on your promotion." Sarah looked at the official badge and identification, symbols of a return to the legitimate intelligence community she had left 3 years earlier. "What's my assignment?" she asked. "Whatever you think needs your attention," Mills replied. "The President was impressed enough by your work to create a new position, Special Advisor for Unconventional Threats. You'll have resources, authority, and most importantly, the freedom to operate the way you've been operating." Meaning? Meaning we finally realize that the most effective intelligence operatives are the ones who care more about protecting people than following protocols. Sarah pocketed her new credentials and looked back at Marcel's fine dining. Through the windows, she could see the evening shift beginning, waiters and waitresses starting another night of serving powerful people who remained blissfully unaware of the threats that surrounded them. "The new waitress," Sarah said. "Is she?" "She's exactly what she appears to be," Mills confirmed. "A graduate student working her way through Georgetown. No hidden agenda, no secret training, just someone who needs a job." "Good," Sarah said. "This place has had enough excitement." As they walked toward the black sedan waiting at the end of the alley, Mills asked the question that had been troubling him for months. "Sarah, why did you really stay? You could have left after the assassination attempt. Your cover was blown, your safety was compromised. Why risk everything to continue the mission?" Sarah paused, considering her answer. "Have you ever noticed that the people with the most power are often the least aware of how vulnerable they are?" Mills nodded. "For 3 years, I watched senators and congressmen and ambassadors make decisions that affected millions of lives. They did it while surrounded by people they never really saw. The waitress, the security guard, the cleaning staff, we were invisible to them." "That bothered you?" "What bothered me was realizing that if we could be invisible to them, so could people who wanted to hurt them. The same blindness that made me effective as a protector made them vulnerable to threats they would never see coming." Sarah looked back at the restaurant one final time. Someone needs to watch over the people who make the decisions. Someone who understands that power makes you a target, and targets need guardians. "And you think you can do that job better from an official position?" Sarah smiled. "I think I can do that job better with resources and backup. The lone wolf approach worked for emergency situations, but building real security requires institutional support." 6 months later, Dr. Sarah Chen, Special Advisor for Unconventional Threats, sat in a briefing room at the State Department, presenting threat assessments to an audience of officials who would have been shocked to learn that she had once served them coffee while conducting counterintelligence operations. Her recommendations were taken seriously now, her analysis requested by departments across the government, her expertise sought by leaders who finally understood that the most dangerous threats were often the ones that looked perfectly ordinary. But late at night, when Sarah reviewed reports from agents embedded in restaurants and hotels and office buildings around the world, she sometimes missed the simplicity of her days at Marcel's. There had been something pure about protecting people who didn't know they needed protection, about preventing disasters that would never make headlines, about saving lives without anyone ever knowing her name. The official recognition was gratifying, but the unofficial vigilance had been meaningful in a way that no promotion or commendation could match. Because Sarah had learned the most important lesson in intelligence work: the best guardians are the ones who ask for nothing in return, except the knowledge that the people they care about can live their lives without fear. And sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one standing quietly in the corner, watching over everyone else while they go about their important business. In restaurants across Washington, D.C., servers continued to refill water glasses and take dinner orders and clear away plates, invisible to the powerful people they served. Most of them were exactly what they appeared to be, hard-working people trying to make a living in the service industry. But a few, just a few, were something more. They were the watchers, the guardians, the protectors who had chosen to care for others from the shadows. And in a world where threats came from directions nobody expected, that quiet vigilance was the difference between safety and catastrophe. The most important people in any room might be the ones you never notice until you need them most.